And what I'm hearing is this isn't crying it out, it's understanding the different kinds of cries. And I know you have a method in your book that kind of talks about tracking that, like understanding and listening for the cycle. And you kind of
Yes.
have a little map for parents to follow to understand
Yeah.
the trajectory of the crying process and like when would be kind of the time to intervene and when is it time to just wait a little bit.
Just to step back and wait, maybe a minute, maybe two, maybe three, and coming and going because they recognize that. Your 5 month old does recognize you coming and going. I like to make sure there's certain markers that I like to make sure are in place. One of them that is the baby can see further out than a foot. They're tracking people from across the room. They're smiling, they're cooing, they're engaging, they're starting to become highly relational. They coo back and forth and smile, and they have some like that moral reflex is integrated. And there are a few other markers. I don't remember if I talked about them in my book or not, but that tells me that the self-soothing mechanism is at least online when all of these relational pieces of our child start to fall into place and they really become interactive babies. And
Beautiful.
especially that tracking across the room, they can see because then they see people going in and going out, especially if they have an older sibling, a toddler. There's no one better to learn object permanence from than a toddler because they're everywhere all at once. They're in and out and they can hear them in another room down the street. It's great.
Yeah. Well, and it just a lot of this comes down to I'm hearing stages, 2 stages of development because you're talking of
Yes.
reflexes. So I know when my son was young, one of my friends in her infinite wisdom, thank goodness, said, you need this app called, I think it was the Wonder Years. And I was able to track based on his age what was happening with him developmentally. So he'd be sleeping well for a month and all of a sudden he'd stop sleeping. And I'm like, what am I doing wrong as a parent? You go
No,
down the shame spiral and
exactly.
you're
Oh,
panicking
yeah.
and you're like, oh, here's the app. This is what's going on in his brain right now. Of course, there's a lot wiring up right now. This makes sense why he's
Yes.
not sleeping. And then I could just relax that nothing was wrong with my kid. Like, I'm
Right.
not a bad mom.
Right. You could sit back and let it happen. That's all good news that they're waking up, their brains waking up. Why a lot of wiring is happening. A lot of skills are being learned. And it's just like there's this bloom and they open up and they wake up. And sometimes it happens in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Well, that's a praying. We don't get to decide that. The brain's doing lots of work. And a lot of the development happens only when we're sleeping. And a lot of people don't know that that's the time when the
Yes.
brain needs to wire up and it assimilates information that they've learned throughout the day. That happens during sleep.
Yes, it
So
does.
if they're practicing lots of things and
Oh,
achieving
yeah.
lots of information, all of a sudden the brain's trying to put that places and organize these neural connections. And kids like, oh, I'm awake now. Like, thanks, brain. Thanks for doing
Yes,
that.
it is. It's a busy. I say that crib in the night is one of the busiest places in the house.
Yeah, because it was neat. In your book, you talked a lot about like to normalize how much the brain is growing in those first 2 years. Like one of the stats you gave was, and I knew that, I mean, by 5, we know 95% of our brain development's done, but your baby is only born with 25 of its brain mass. And by the time they're 2, they have 80%. Like, holy cow,
Yeah,
that's a lot of change.
that is. It's dynamic.
Yeah. And that causes sleep disruptions. And those are those leaps that kids, and you speak about like that development
Yes.
happens.
Yeah.
So it doesn't mean there's a bad parent. It's just that brain's got a lot to do in those 2 years.
Yes. And when we take big leaps in development, even throughout development, hopefully we keep developing our whole lives. When we take big leaps, the brain and the body will often go back and pick up what it does well, what it already knows how to do, and practice that again to take it into the new area of learning. And so what can look like regressions, it's like it's only really a regression if we follow it. I like to not focus on the regression because we tend to follow what we focus on, to focus on the leap. Now, if there is a regression, we support it. Maybe they do need a little more support reassurance in a regression. I'd say separation ambivalence, separation anxiety can look like a regression. And that does need attending to.
Absolutely. And you do discuss a lot of what infants need throughout their day, which is what I really appreciate that approach. I think we get so focused on the problem, which is lack of sleep. And I need to get them to sleep and I need
Yes.
to sleep because I'm this poor mom who called in. they're tired and they're exhausted. And they just like want the end result. But one of the things your book really dives into are all of these things our kids need throughout the day to ensure they can fall asleep. And that
Yes.
we forget to kind of investigate some of those areas. Could you speak to some of those areas that we need to consider? I guess it's like for sleep hygiene. I guess that would be.
Yeah, that's definitely sleep hygiene. You know, what we're going to do. I look at sleep hygiene when we're coming into the evening, like how do we set up the evening that's going to best support sleep? Child sleep, I like to look at it from wake up in the morning. So in RIE, we talk a lot about this of the dependable, predictable routine of the day, how to build a routine based on the authentic needs of the child. I prefer that to a schedule. I think schedules can teach children more about us than their sense of self. So we want to build it around their authentic needs. Well, good news, most infants, toddlers at a certain developmental stage, it happens at about the same time every day, right? There's a wake window anytime between 6 and 7 is normal. Sadly, I found out this year that 5 a.m. is a normal wake up time for children. It's just a bummer.
I knew that. My son, he still is, he's 8 now. I mean,
You
and
had an early riser?
yeah, but I'm an early riser, so thank goodness. So at least
Right.
I'm a parent who gets up early anyway. So my husband, not so much.
See, it was flipped in our house, and early risers are that is a genetic component. And 5 a.m. is early for most of us, but it's not really, that's an authentic wake time for many humans. And so it starts in the day that how the day rolls out. We want a dependable, predictable routine because infants, even the young infant, is very tuned into the context of their environment, the physical environment, and the emotional tone of the relational field in their environment. And when we set up a pretty predictable routine around their needs, you wake up, we eat. Maybe you have some playtime, some downtime, some hanging out time. I mean, for an infant, then they're ready for a nap again. So we're building a routine, let's say for your 5, 6 month old that we were just talking about, that's going to have 3 naps a day. And depending on those naps, that baby might have what I call a swing nap at the end of the day, right? Just it's like, yeah, maybe a 30-minute catch-up nap so that bedtime isn't at 5 p.m. So we build that routine of the day, the most important ritual and routine for families, and it's the hardest time of the day when everyone comes together in the evening before dinner. There's a lot to get done. That part, I really like to build something that we look forward to, turn off all devices. You come in, come together, greet each other, connect. That's the best time for big movement, big body, big movement play. Then we're going into dinner, then books, then bath, and then into the bedroom. And that's the most intimate ritual. Little ones, even a 6-month-old, is highly attuned to ritual. They're very embodied, and they're learning everything through the physicality, the physical repetition of us providing care for them. And so it's never too early to start building a very close, intimate ritual with little ones. And they just, it's irresistible to them.
People made fun of me, actually, my family, how married I was to that with my son, because if he didn't have it, it was just he was already an early riser and he's super active. So it took him quite a while to fall asleep. It was never quick for him. He was a good sleeper, but like getting there took some time. And I was just like, no, like we are home after dinner. And because there's a
Yes.
whole thing that has to happen. And
Yes.
he would get there, but the second I disrupted that, so everyone's like, you need to be more flexible. In Europe, they do this. I was like, I'm telling you, for this kid, my daughters are different, but for this kid, he needs it. Like that's the only way, because it just takes him so long to settle otherwise. Even to this day, like he's just a kid that takes time to settle.
And it's interesting. My 23-year-old was like that, exactly like that as young. And now it's built into his life that he cares, that part of himself he takes great care of, because he likes to get up and go surfing early in the morning. He likes to get up and go fly fishing early in the morning. He's a very physical dude. And he cares for that part of himself. He'll give himself the downtime. It's really beautiful. And this is what I hope for parents, for us to tune into them and get to know them and that particular need of your son. When we attend to it, it unfolds and it makes it so much easier for them and us. And then we can create something we look forward to. And our children feel that.
Yeah,
When
they
we
do.
look
They feel
forward
like,
to it.
yeah, I know just parents, like one of the things she outlines in her book, she really talks about that routine and just like these markers are, food, love, play, and then of course the sleep that follows, which is what everyone's focused on who's listening to this podcast. But routine is a huge part of that, and also like kids getting tummy time and exploring and all those things, and that love, that attachment. And that can be really hard when parents are working. Like I know, especially I'm in Canada, so most moms here have a year of mat leave, so they have a
That's
year with their
beautiful.
infant. And even in other places it would be longer, but I know I have, I went to school in the States, and I know there's so many moms listening who had 3 months,
I
3 weeks even. So
know.
any recommendations? Like we're really trying to build that relationship. Is the evenings what you would focus on then if they have to work
Yeah,
in the
evenings and weekends.
evenings and
Even
week?
the morning, that's where you're going to hold on to breastfeeding probably longer. That morning where you really connect, to take time to connect and increase the quality of the time if you feel like the quantity of the time is challenged. When we come back together at the end of the day, it's our presence that we come back and we're very present. There was a lot of the study of rye was done in Palo Alto. There was a center there, a rye daycare, and it was built around these principles. And the mothers would come early, come in, and stay for a little bit with the child. Maybe even nurse them and have put them down for their first nap. So they built a routine around the mother and child coming in the morning and making that transition. So if you can work with your daycare provider or anything that you can do to make that transition, that handoff, so that we slow down, we get present, and it becomes meaningful, because children are making meaning in their bodies first before they make meaning here with language, right? And so it's the physicality of it. It's the presence. It's the attunement. It's coming together that, and on weekends, really planning your time. And the routine of the day really tells the child where they are. This is what's happening. This is what's happening next.
It's that rhythm, right? That rhythm and predictability that I think our brainstem, a really lower part of our brain, leans into. And so whenever we can create rhythm for a child, I don't care if they're 6 months old or they're 14 years
Yes.
old, we all
Yes.
like to know what's coming next.
Yes.